Soldier finds his retired K-9 dog starving to death on the street. What happens next is shocking. "For heaven's sake, he's completely exhausted," cried veterinarian Clara when she saw Axel. "Severe malnutrition. Who did this?" Jonas clenched his fists. "Axel was my K-9. They said they'd take care of him. They'll pay for this." Later, in a dark warehouse full of tortured dogs, a thug named Hans yelled, "Who the hell are you?" Jonas, driven by rage, yelled back, "Set them free. Want to know how this dramatic fight ends and what will become of Jonas and Axel? Subscribe to our channel, like this video, and listen to the whole shocking story. The smell of damp concrete, urine, and pure despair hit Jonas as he pushed open the rusty metal door of the warehouse. Adrenaline pulsed hotly through his veins, drowning out the soft drizzle drumming on the corrugated iron roof outside. His heart pounded against his ribs, a wild beat to the quiet, heart-rending whimpers coming from within. He had a crowbar in his hand, his knuckles white with tension. This was madness, absolute madness. But he couldn't help it. Dim light from a single flickering bulb fell on rows of cramped cages. Shadows danced, distorting the outlines of the creatures within. Dogs, dozens of them. German shepherds, Malinois Labradors, many looked like the proud, strong K-9 units he'd served with. But there was no pride here, only misery. Emaciated to the bone, their fur matted and dull, their eyes hollow and filled with fear. Some weakly lifted their heads as he approached a spark of hope in their otherwise apathy. Others remained motionless, perhaps already beyond hope. A deep growl made him turn around. A man as broad as a cupboard, with a baseball bat casually slung over his shoulder, stepped out of the darkness of a corridor. His small eyes scrutinized Jonas disparagingly. "What the hell? Who are you and what are you doing here?" The voice was a harsh growl, threatening and cold. Jonas tensed every muscle. He had no time for explanations, no desire to negotiate. The sight of the suffering animals had extinguished all reason, all caution. Only rage burned within him, a cold, clear flame. "I'm here to get them out," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, but filled with unshakable determination. The man laughed scornfully. "I hardly believe that." He raised his bat. "You're not leaving this place alive, buddy." Before the man could swing, Jonas leaped forward. His years of military training took over. He parried the blow with the crowbar, the impact shaking his arms. Sparks flew. The man grunted in surprise at Jonas's speed. Jonas took advantage of the brief confusion and rammed the end of the crowbar into the man's stomach. The giant gasped and backed away. Behind him, the dogs were barking louder now, a mixture of fear and excitement. Jonas knew he didn't have much time. More men would soon appear. He had to open the cages, as many as possible. He turned to the first cage and fiddled with the latch. The metal creaked. Suddenly, a sharp pain in his shoulder. He cried out and stumbled. A second man had appeared, smaller, wirier, with a knife in his hand. Blood seeped through Jonas's jacket. The situation was becoming critical. Had he overreached? Was this desperate solo effort his end? The thought of Axel, of the promise he had made to himself, flared up inside him and banished the fear. He would not fail here, not now, not like this. The fine drizzle now pattering on the warehouse roof had also wet the cobblestone streets on the outskirts of Cologne 3 days ago. It was the evening of June 1st, 2025. A cool, unpleasant evening that blurred the streetlights in a diffuse, yellowish glow. Jonas Weber, 32, a former sergeant major and dog handler in the German armed forces, was on his way home from a casual job at a construction site. The old army jacket he wore offered little protection from the cold seeping into his bones. Since his honorable discharge 2 years ago, he had struggled to find his feet again. The camaraderie, the clear structure, the meaningful task. He sorely missed all of that. His gaze fell on a huddled figure next to an overturned trash can. At first he thought it was just a pile of rags, but then something moved, a soft whimper. He stepped closer. It was a German shepherd, black and brown, its fur matted with dirt and rain. The animal was emaciated to the bone, its ribs clearly visible beneath its thin skin. Its eyes, dull and tired, stared at him hopelessly. And then Jonas saw the scar, a small crescent-shaped scar on his left ear. His heart skipped a beat. He knew this scar. He knew this dog. "Axel," he whispered incredulously. The name escaped his lips like a prayer. He fell to his knees, the wetness of the sidewalk soaking through his pants, but he didn't care. His hands trembled as he touched the wet fur. The dog raised its head, a faint twitch running through its tail, a soft whimper, a hint of recognition in its clouded eyes. "Axel, my God, what happened to you, buddy?" Jonas's voice broke. Tears welled up in his eyes, mingling with the rain on his face. Axel, his loyal K-9 partner, with whom he had tracked down bombs in Kosovo, who had saved his life more than once. Axel, the hero who, after his retirement a year ago, had supposedly ended up in a good care center for former service dogs. Here he lay a shadow of his former self, close to starvation. Jonas didn't hesitate for a second. He carefully lifted the emaciated body. Axel weighed barely 20 kilograms. He ran through the rainwater splashing under his boots. He knew of an animal clinic 3 blocks away. He prayed it was still open. Dr. Clara Vogel, a veterinarian in her 50s, with tightly tied back hair and kind eyes, opened the door. "For heaven's sake," she cried in horror when she saw Axel. "Bring him in, quickly!" The next few hours were a nightmare. Axel received infusions and was examined. Dr. Vogel repeatedly shook her head. Severe malnutrition, dehydration. Who would do that to an animal? Her voice was filled with disgust. Jonas clenched his fists. He told her everything about Axel, their shared service, his supposed retirement at a center. They said they'd take good care of him. They promised. Anger boiled up inside him, a helpless, desperate rage. While Dr. Vogel stabilized Axel, Jonas pulled out his cell phone. He searched for information about the center that had taken over Axel. The website looked professional, full of pictures of happy dogs and promises of the best care. But as he dug deeper, he found inconsistencies, anonymous comments on forums reporting missing dogs and dubious dealings. The trigger came when he found a hidden article from a small local animal welfare organization. The article was poorly researched and full of speculation, but it did mention one name and one suspicion the center might be a front for something much worse. The suspicion that retired K-9 dogs were being sold to illegal testing labs. An ice-cold shiver ran down Jonas's spine. Axel, his hero, his partner, abused as a laboratory animal. The thought was unbearable. In that moment, he swore to himself that he would find out the truth. And if it was the last thing he did, he would bring those responsible to justice. He wouldn't let Axel down again. His goal was clear. He had to find out what had happened to Axel, and he had to prevent other dogs from suffering the same fate. The fight had only just begun. The following days were characterized by restless, feverish activity. While Axel slowly showed the first signs of improvement under Dr. Vogel's careful care at the veterinary clinic, he began to eat small amounts of special food, and his dull coat no longer appeared quite so lifeless. Jonas plunged into his investigation. His first stop took him to the official address of the Edelweiss Retirement and Care Center for Service Dogs, as it called itself. It was an inconspicuous office building in an industrial park. The receptionist was polite but firm. Yes, they cared for retired service dogs. No information about individual dogs could not be released for privacy reasons. When he asked how Axel was doing and why he had been found on the street, he received only evasive answers and the comment that dogs sometimes ran away. A blatant lie, Jonas sensed. Axel was trained loyal and would never run away without a reason. Frustrated, he turned to his old contacts in the Bundeswehr. Some comrades were saddened by Axel's fate, but there was little they could do officially. Retired dogs were no longer under the military's jurisdiction. He was referred to animal welfare organizations and the police. The police accepted his report, but without concrete evidence of a crime, their hands were tied. A lost, malnourished dog was tragic, but not necessarily a crime committed by the organization that was supposed to be caring for him. Jonas felt like he was hitting a wall. The bureaucracy, the indifference, the apparent legality of the Edelweiss facade infuriated him. He spent hours online scouring databases and social media, reading every last clue. He came across more reports of former service dogs who had disappeared without a trace after being transferred to similar facilities. The pattern became increasingly clear. These weren't isolated cases. There had to be a system behind this. Dr. Vogel was a great support to him during this time. Not only did she care for Axel selflessly, but she also listened patiently to Jonas, encouraging his suspicions. "You have to be careful, Jonas," she often warned him. "If these people are really as unscrupulous as you suspect, they could be dangerous." She helped him organize his notes and gave him advice on how to structure his information. Axel's condition improved painfully slowly. His physical wounds were healing, but his emotional scars remained deep. He was easily jumpy, reacting with panic to loud noises and sudden movements. Only in Jonas's presence did he seem to relax somewhat. Every evening, Jonas sat with him for hours, speaking softly to him, stroking his fur. These moments gave him the strength to continue. He saw the infinite trust in Axel's eyes, and it strengthened his resolve. Complications increased as Jonas tried to trace Edelweiss's cash flows. He encountered a murky network of shell companies and offshore accounts. This exceeded his capabilities as an amateur detective. He needed professional help, but who could he trust? He remembered a former comrade, Max, who worked as an IT specialist after his service and had a passion for digital forensics. Hesitantly, he contacted him. Max was skeptical at first, but when Jonas told him the whole story and presented the evidence he had gathered so far, he became curious. "This stinks to high heaven, my friend," said Max. "Let me see what I can dig up." While Max searched the digital underground for evidence, Jonas intensified his observations of the Edelweiss office. He noticed delivery trucks coming and going at odd hours, often in the middle of the night. The drivers seemed nervous, and their cargo was always concealed. Once he managed to secretly attach a tracking device to one of the delivery trucks. The route led not to another animal shelter or foster home, but to a dilapidated warehouse complex on the outskirts of the city, far from prying eyes. The tension rose. Jonas knew he was on to something big. It wasn't just about Axel anymore. It was about dozens, perhaps hundreds of animals who had been subjected to a cruel fate. The thought of it gave him no peace. He barely slept and ate irregularly. The hunt for the truth had completely consumed him. He was aware of the risk. If he were caught snooping around, it could end badly for him. But the thought of the suffering animals and of Axel, who had entrusted him with his life, drove him on inexorably. The message from Max came in the middle of the night, an encrypted email with the subject line, "Bullseye." Jonas's eyes widened. His heart began to beat faster. Max had done it. He had hacked into the internal servers of the corporate network behind Edelweiss. What he had found was even more shocking than Jonas could have ever imagined. There were delivery lists, invoices, and internal correspondence. They documented in black and white the sale of biomaterial species, Canis lupus familiaris, various breeds former service dogs, to various pharmaceutical research institutions and private laboratories in Eastern Europe and even some non-European countries, where animal welfare laws were more lax or could be more easily circumvented. The prices were exorbitant. A retired K-9 dog, trained and robust, fetched a fortune in this cynical market. Edelweiss was just the tip of the iceberg, a collection point that maintained the appearance of legitimacy. The worst part, however, were the attached files, short video sequences apparently from surveillance cameras in the warehouse, whose address Jonas had already discovered using the tracking device. The videos showed dogs in cramped, filthy cages, emaciated, apathetic. Men in rough work clothes could be seen treating the animals, roughly driving them with sticks. One video even showed a dog that resisted being brutally beaten. Jonas felt sick. The sight was unbearable. He had to turn off the video before his bile rose. This was definitive proof. The point of no return. The anger, the grief, the helplessness, all of it coalesced into an iron determination. The system had betrayed Axel and all the others. The official channels were too slow, too bureaucratic. He couldn't wait any longer until the wheels of justice might eventually start turning. These animals were suffering now. In this very moment, Jonas made a decision. He would no longer just observe and gather information. He would act. He would go to that warehouse and get the dogs out of there, alone if necessary. It was a desperate, dangerous plan. He was no longer an active duty soldier. He had no support, no equipment beyond what he could procure himself. But he had his training, his courage, and the burning certainty that he was doing the right thing. He called Dr. Vogel, his voice trembling with suppressed emotion. He told her about Max's discovery, about the videos, about his decision. Clara was horrified by the cruelty, but also deeply worried about Jonas. "Jonas, this is suicide. You can't just rush in there. They're dangerous criminals." "I have to, Clara," he said firmly. "I can't just stand by after seeing this. These dogs deserve better. Axel deserves better." He asked her a favor. If he hadn't contacted her by the next morning, she should alert the police and send them all the information Max had gathered. It was his only safety net. Clara tried to change his mind, begging him to go to the police, but Jonas persisted. He knew the police wouldn't simply storm the warehouse without a warrant based on solid, court-admissible evidence, and that would take time. Time these dogs didn't have. After hanging up, Jonas began his preparations. He packed a backpack with the essentials: water, energy bars, a first aid kit, a powerful flashlight, cable ties, and a crowbar. He dressed in dark, inconspicuous clothing. He tucked his old combat knife into his boot. He felt like he was about to embark on an important mission, only this time he was completely on his own. He visited Axel one last time at the animal clinic. The dog was sleeping peacefully, his breathing even. Jonas stroked his head gently. "I'll get your friends out of there, buddy," he whispered. "I promise you." The sight of the peacefully sleeping dog who had endured so much suffering gave him the final motivation he needed. He was no longer just a broken veteran searching for his place in the world. He was once again a protector, a fighter for the defenseless. He was Jonas Weber, and he had a mission. The turning point had been reached. The reactive investigator had become a proactive rescuer willing to risk everything. The drive to the warehouse complex on the outskirts of Cologne took almost an hour. The drizzle had started again, and visibility was poor. Jonas parked his old van a few hundred meters away in a dark side street to avoid attracting attention. The area was deserted, only the silhouettes of the dilapidated industrial buildings loomed eerily into the night sky. He checked his equipment once more, took a deep breath, and tried to suppress the nervousness that sat like a cold knot in his stomach. He moved cautiously forward in the shadows of the buildings, his senses sharp as in the old days. Every cracking branch, every distant sound made him jump. The warehouse, marked on Max's satellite images and the delivery truck routes, was a large windowless box made of corrugated iron and concrete. A high chain-link fence surrounded the compound, loosely reinforced in places with barbed wire. Only a single dim light burned above a heavy steel door on the side of the building. Jonas slowly circled the area looking for weak spots in the fence or any other way to get in unnoticed. He found a spot where the fence was loose and could be easily lifted. He slipped through the metal, gently scratching against his jacket. Now he was on the property. The adrenaline was starting to kick in, driving away his tiredness and fear. He crept to the side of the building, always staying close to the wall. He could hear muffled sounds from inside, occasional barking, the clang of metal, deep male voices. How many of them were in there? Were they armed? He had to assume so. He reached the steel door. It was locked, secured by a massive padlock. Picking the lock would make too much noise. He kept searching. At the rear of the building, he found a smaller, rusted metal door that looked less secure. He carefully pried it open with the crowbar. The metal creaked, but after a few tense moments, the latch gave way. The door cracked open. Jonas listened. Nothing. He slowly pushed the door open further and peered inside. A dark corridor, the smell of disinfectant mingled with the unmistakable stench of animal suffering. This was the right place. His heart was pounding in his throat. He knew this was the most dangerous part. If he were discovered now, he wouldn't stand a chance. He remembered his training, the countless exercises in urban warfare, in silent maneuvers. He moved like a shadow through the corridor, gripping the crowbar tightly. Suddenly, he heard footsteps. He pressed himself into a niche, holding his breath. Two men walked down the corridor, talking quietly in German, with an Eastern European accent. They wore dirty overalls and seemed bored. One of them held a stun gun. Jonas waited until they passed and disappeared around the next corner. He continued on his way deeper into the labyrinth of the warehouse. The dog's soft whining and howling grew louder, guiding him like an invisible thread. It tore at his heart. He had to concentrate, not let his emotions overwhelm him. Finally, he reached a large hall. Here, the cages stood row upon row, just as he'd seen in the horrific videos. The sight was even worse than he expected. The animals were in a pitiful state. Some barked weakly when they saw him, others just stared at him impassively. He recognized some breeds typical of K-9 units, his former comrades. A man sat on a chair at a small table staring at a flickering monitor. He was obviously a security guard. He didn't seem very attentive. An empty beer bottle sat next to him. Jonas had to get past him to get to the cages. He waited for the right moment. When the man yawned and stretched, Jonas crept behind his back as quietly as possible. He reached the first row of cages. The locks were simple latches that opened quickly. He began opening one cage after another. The dogs, hesitant at first, then increasingly bold, came out, sniffed him, licked his hands. Their gratitude was palpable. But then as he was opening the fourth cage, he heard a scream. "Hey, what are you doing?" The guard had spotted him. He jumped up and reached for a radio on his belt. Jonas knew there was no turning back now. The confrontation was inevitable. He turned around, ready to defend himself, ready to fight for these innocent lives. The final decisive phase of his mission had begun. The path to the climax was paved, and it led directly through the confrontation with the tormentors of these animals. The guard yelled into his radio before Jonas could reach him. "Alarm intruder in Hall B. All available forces here immediately." His voice echoed off the concrete walls and mingled with the rising barks of the now freed and agitated dogs. Jonas knew he only had a few minutes before reinforcements arrived. He pushed aside the guard who was clumsily trying to block his path and continued running along the rows of cages, tearing open one door after another. Some dogs were too weak to get out immediately. Others pushed past him into the freedom of the hall. Then the closet of a man Jonas had already seen in his worst nightmares appeared the man with the baseball bat from the video, obviously the one responsible for the dirty work. He was accompanied by two other men, both muscular and with the same brutal expression in their eyes. One of them was the smaller, wiry man with the knife who had injured Jonas earlier. "Well, look at that, our little animal friend is back," growled the leader Hans with an ugly grin. "Did you really think you could just walk in here and free our goods? These aren't goods, they're living beings." Jonas shouted back, his voice almost cracking with rage. He stood protectively in front of a group of dogs gathered behind him, the crowbar firmly grasped in both hands. Hans laughed. "Creatures that bring us good money." He signaled to his men, "Finish him off, but let him suffer a little." The two men attacked simultaneously. Jonas dodged the knife thrust of one and parried the blow of the other, who tried to hit him with a heavy metal pipe. It was an unequal fight. There were three of them, and he was alone and already injured. But the sight of the terrified dogs behind him gave him superhuman strength. He fought like a lion, blocking, dodging, and even delivering blows with the crowbar. One of the dogs, a powerful Malinois still possessing a fighting spirit despite his emaciation, suddenly lunged forward and bit the man with the pipe in the leg. The man screamed in pain and dropped his weapon. This brief moment of distraction gave Jonas the chance to bring the knife-wielding man to the ground with a well-aimed kick to the back of his knee. Hans, who had watched the events with growing anger, now charged forward himself, swinging the baseball bat like a club. Jonas barely dodged the first powerful blow. The bat whistled inches past his head and smashed into an empty cage. The noise was deafening. As Jonas wrestled with Hans, the other freed dogs who had previously stayed in the background began to become restless. They barked, growled, and some circled the fighters. It was as if they sensed that this was their fight, their chance for freedom. Suddenly, as Hans had cornered Jonas and was preparing for the final blow, sirens outside began wailing, getting louder and closer. Blue lights flickered through the dirty skylights of the hall. Hans paused, an expression of disbelief and anger on his face. Damn it, the cops, how? In this moment of confusion, Jonas put everything on the line. He rammed the crowbar with full force into Hans's knee. Hans screamed in pain and fell to the ground. At the same moment, heavily armed police officers stormed through the main door of the hall, followed by Dr. Vogel, who looked pale but determined. "Hands up, police! Not another step!" shouted an operations commander. Hans's remaining henchmen surrendered without resistance in the face of superior numbers. Hans himself, cursing and writhing, was arrested by 2 officers. Jonas slumped exhausted against a wall, the crowbar slipping from his hand. The tension fell from him, leaving behind a leaden tiredness, but also an infinite sense of relief. He had done it. The dogs were free. He looked at Dr. Vogel, who smiled at him with tears in her eyes. The chaos in the warehouse soon gave way to orderly activity. Veterinarians and volunteers from various animal welfare organizations, alerted by Dr. Vogel and the police, arrived to care for the dogs. Over 50 animals, most of them former service dogs, were freed from their miserable cages. Many were in critical condition and required immediate medical attention. Jonas's shoulder wound was being treated by a paramedic. Meanwhile, he watched as the dogs were carefully examined, given water, and loaded into crates for transport to veterinary clinics and safe shelters. He saw gratitude in their eyes, a silent appreciation for his actions. The police secured evidence and took the personal details of everyone involved. Thanks to the data hacked by Max and the statements of the arrested men, the entire gang behind the illegal dog trade was uncovered in the following days and weeks. It turned out that it was an internationally operating network. The case made national headlines and caused outrage. Jonas was celebrated as a hero, even though he never saw it that way himself. He had simply done what had to be done. His illegal action, his unauthorized entry into the warehouse, was judged leniently by the authorities given the circumstances and the successful rescue of the animals. He got off with a warning and community service, which he ironically served at one of the shelters that had taken in the rescued dogs. Axel made a full recovery under Dr. Vogel's and Jonas's care. His physical wounds healed, and slowly the sparkle returned to his eyes. When he was stable enough, Jonas officially took him in. The small apartment became Axel's new loving home. The nightmares that had plagued Jonas since his return from deployment became less frequent. Caring for Axel, the shared routine of walks in the park and quiet evenings on the couch gave his life meaning again. Jonas and Axel's story touched many people. Donations for the rescued K-9 dogs and other abused animals poured in. The public attention led to tighter controls and new guidelines for the care of retired service dogs in Germany. From then on, Jonas became actively involved in animal welfare, becoming a voice for those without their own. On a sunny afternoon, a few months later, Jonas and Axel were sitting on a bench in the park. Axel, now once again a handsome, healthy German shepherd, laid his head on Jonas's lap. Jonas scratched him behind the ears. "We did it, buddy," he whispered. "We did it." The scar on Axel's ear was still there, a silent reminder of their shared past and the long, dangerous road back to each other. But it was also a sign of hope, proof that even the deepest wounds can heal when courage, determination, and an unbreakable friendship are stronger than any cruelty. The shocking truth about Axel's fate had led to a new beginning for Axel, for Jonas, and for many others.